In this video we'll be focusing on the OCR GCSE History question, what is the message of this cartoon? And of course it's a 6-point question, and we can see here on the right hand side of the cartoon that we have the historical figure Mussolini, who was the leader of Italy during the 1930s and the 1940s, and we have him stood somewhere, as you can see, accompanied with a couple of characters here almost stood in a certain kind of way, pointing their finger at him. Down here we can see when the magazine was published. It was published in 1935 by a British magazine known as Punch, and this is quite renowned for political cartoons at the time. And we can see down here that we have some writing, and it says France and England, then it says brackets together question mark. It's difficult to see that, and it's difficult to see the accompanying writing there, so I've actually put it over here on the right in a slightly larger font, and the title of it is The Awful Warning. And we've also got down here some words, and by the looks of things they may be singing. This could be due to the speech marks there, or indeed their body postures. And here we have, we don't want you to fight, but by jingo, if you do, we shall probably issue a joint memorandum suggesting a mild disapproval of you. And we're going to focus on the overall message of this by looking at the different symbols contained within the source and also the writing that accompanies it. Of course, it's essential when answering an exam question that we actually consider the overall success criteria, the mark scheme. And we can see right at the top that in order to achieve 1 or 2 marks out of 6, you will answer the question. Now, I recommend you directly do this in your opening sentences, but in order to improve your marks even further, you'll need to include some source details to back up your points. So, for example, you'll need to make references to how these people are standing, for example, and their facial expressions, and lots of key details within it, including the writing. And then, of course, in order to maximise your points, you need to include contextual knowledge, obviously meaning what was going on at the time. This is really important for you to consider exactly what was going on during 1935. So let's have a look at the contextual knowledge of what was going on at the time in 1935. And we need to go right back to 1919, when the League of Nations was set up with the main aim of trying to achieve world peace. It was set up in the aftermath of World War I, when countries were absolutely terrified of future consequences of an even larger war happening again in the future, and consequently they clubbed together in order to find ways of trying to stop future wars from ever happening again. However, despite it being the original idea of the USA, they actually refused to join the League of Nations because they did not want to get mixed up in the squabbles and the arguments of the European countries again. Now, this actually left the League of Nations open to accusations that it was a weak one. Despite Britain and France being leading players within the League, the fact remained that USA, the most powerful country in the world, did not play its part. Add this together with another fact that the League did not have an army to call its own, meant that it did not have the power to stop stronger countries from doing what they want. And despite the League having some successes in the 1920s, it was with weaker ones. But when it came to stronger countries like Italy, led by Mussolini in the 1930s and 1940s, the League was really powerless to stop them from doing what they wanted to do. This was particularly clear during the 1930s because memories from World War I in Britain and France's minds were still very strong. They did not want to get in any conflicts which could lead to the deaths of their soldiers. They had lost enough in the Great War of 1914 to 1918. And there was another fact that during this period there was a Great Depression. This was like a massive recession, which meant that unemployment was very high in Britain and France, and they could not afford to get involved in expensive wars abroad. Now, Mussolini was aware of this, and he was able to ultimately get away with the fact that he was able to invade a weaker country, nowadays known as Ethiopia, but back then known as Abyssinia. This was a classic example of a stronger country attacking a weaker one, and it was an episode of what the League was designed to do, to stop stronger countries from being so aggressive. However, because of the issues already mentioned, that Britain and France was not did not have the willpower to get involved in such conflicts, ultimately the League failed to stop Italy from taking over Abyssinia. And it was a win for those people that criticised the League of Nations for being weak. It was a win for Mussolini because he was able to take over Abyssinia, and in the background all the time, Adolf Hitler took note of the lack of power that the League really had. So in a moment it will be time for you to press pause, and you will be considering what is the message of this cartoon. You'll need to look carefully within the cartoon details and the writing that accompanies it. So for example, think carefully about the location of this source. Where are they, and what are they actually doing? Who could these people here represent, and what could this, or who could this figure be? Look at all of the key details within the cartoon, because everything is there for a purpose. We've got some text here to accompany it. We've got a title there, The Awful Warning. Think about the tone of all of this. We've got some text here that accompanies it. We've got it in speech marks as though they are perhaps singing it. What could that represent? And ultimately, you need to think carefully about 1935, of what was going on at the time. So you need to press pause now. So let's have a look at the overall message of the cartoon. I think it's really important to draw your attention to the location of the cartoon itself. When we look at what they are stood on, this could possibly represent like a stage. It could represent a stage, particularly when we look at how they are dressed. It's almost pantomime-like. We have a background there in the middle, and this bit here could either represent the curtains, or more than likely an entrance and exit to the stage itself. And when we consider the title of the source, The Awful Warning, it's clear when we look at the word itself, it's not an awful warning. The tone here is sarcastic. The representatives of France and Britain are in the middle there, wagging their finger at Mussolini. And when we look at their facial expressions, their mouths suggest that they are singing. When we look at the facial expression of Mussolini, it's clear that he is actually listening to what they have to say. Perhaps he's listening out for some kind of threat from Britain and France. It's clear that they're actually talking about the so-called Abyssinian dispute. This is because Italy is about to invade Abyssinia, and he's listening carefully to what Britain and France has to say. But when we look at the cartoon itself, the text that accompanies it, it's clear that it's not a very serious threat. The threat is actually a song which says, "We don't want you to fight." That's what Britain and France are saying to Mussolini. They go further and say, "But by jingo, if you do, we shall probably issue a joint memorandum," which is like a letter, "suggesting mild disapproval of you." And that's it. That's all Britain and France are doing. And that's what the League of Nations generally could do at the time, which was simply to disapprove or to condemn a country. And that clearly was not enough to stop a stronger country like Italy from doing what it wanted. It's really important that we take into consideration here that this is 1935. This supports the idea that it is to do with the Abyssinian dispute when Italy invaded Abyssinia. Britain and France could be behaving in that way because they did not have the willpower to get involved in future conflicts, possibly because of the Great Depression or like a very, very bad recession. They could not afford to do it, and they did not have the willpower because of the memories of World War I. So when answering what is the message of this cartoon, you'll obviously directly answer the question in your opening sentence and state what the overall meaning is. It's clear that the overall message of this is that the League of Nations, Britain and France also, are being criticised for being weak. They are being criticised for not being strong enough to stop the likes of Mussolini's Italy. And you'll need to go further by using source details to back this up. So make sure that you include that this is Britain and France. Make sure that you include this idea that the awful warning is sarcastic and the song is sarcastic too. You only need to include 2 or 3 examples of this, but also don't forget that you will need to include the contextual knowledge of what was going on at the time in 1935.